I stared across the sleek, chrome table at Ambassador Kalexa, his multifaceted eyes blinking slowly as his mandibles clicked in agitation. We had just concluded another round of unproductive trade negotiations between his people, the Viking Consortium, and the United Human Republic. "I don't understand," the towering insectoid diplomat said, his voice resonating deeply. "How can one single species command such power and influence across the entire Orion quadrant?" I flashed him what I hoped was a disarming smile. As the Republic's diplomatic liaison to the Viking, I was used to fielding this type of bewilderment about humanity's rapid expansion and technological supremacy. "You have to understand our history, Ambassador. We're somewhat of an anomaly compared to other spacefaring civilizations." Klaxar's mandibles twitched. "So I've been told, but your kind rose to galactic prominence too swiftly, overshadowing empires that held sway for tens of thousands of cycles. It simply defies reason." Chuckling, I tapped a button and a holographic star chart bloomed above the table. "Let me give you the abbreviated version. You see, humans evolved on one of the harshest, most punishing worlds in our region of space." I highlighted Earth, a blue-green jewel hanging in fortuitous proximity to several gas giants. Our homeworld's very existence was shaped by cataclysm and scoured by extinction events that pruned away all but the most tenacious life forms. That hellish crucible forged a species of survivors. Klaxar leaned forward, his compound eyes glittering with curiosity. "I'm familiar with the theory of worlds spawning hardy inhabitants, but your rise still seems improbable." I finished his thought with a grin. "Just wait, it gets better." With a sweep of my hands, I brought up complex gravitational models depicting the slingshot system humans had pioneered. You see, those gas giants in our home system, we didn't have the conventional sublight technology for economical interstellar expansion, not at first. "But those gravitational fields—" Klaxar began to grasp the implications. I nodded enthusiastically. "Precisely! We learned to ride the immense gravity waves, using those planets as a metaphorical slingshot to propel our early spacecraft across the vast distances. It was a highly inefficient means of travel, but it allowed us to rapidly establish footholds across dozens of surrounding systems before any other civilization even realized we existed." Klaxar's mandibles parted in a near-human expression of shock. "Impossible. You couldn't have developed sufficient industrial capacity with such crude interstellar vectors." Grinning wolfishly, I tapped a few more commands, and sudden a time-lapse graphic sprang to life, a simulation of human spacecraft expanding outwards in an accelerating spherical wavefront. Not only was it possible, Ambassador, but we doubled down on our early territorial claims. As soon as we'd secured resource-rich planets and moons, we diverted all efforts into economic and technological development. The hologram showed spheres representing human colonial worlds, rapidly growing and diversifying even as the wavefront expansion continued unabated. While other spacefaring empires were still bogged down by sublight physics and costly conventional space lanes, we were spreading with impunity. I could see the proverbial pieces clicking into place for the Ambassador. By the time the rest of the galactic powers awoke to your existence, you'd already secured a vast stranglehold. His tone conveyed a mixture of awe and no small degree of reproach. Humans clearly weren't playing by any established rules of interstellar conduct. Adopting a more conciliatory tone, I gave a self-depreciating shrug. In our defense, we genuinely had no idea there were any established protocols for interstellar expansion. Humans were wildly unprepared for making first contact and finding ourselves a part of a vast galactic community. I brought up another visualization, this one demonstrating how conventional warp and sublight corridors webbed across the galaxy compared to the omnidirectional scatter of human territories. We essentially had a several-century head start, while everybody else was still playing by the old rules of mapping sublight space lanes and warp conduits. Klaxar had grown silent, his eyes fixating on the holographic display as if trying to discern some hidden meaning. I could read the subtext in his reticence, the implicit question of how the error had been allowed to compound so spectacularly. I cleared my throat. Of course, our little misunderstanding grew exponentially more awkward once we developed our slipstream drive and joined the broader galactic civilization. By then, we'd established sovereign human territory spanning over 15% of the Orion Quadrant and extracted a staggering amount of resources from those colonies. The ambassador started, as if awoken from a trance. By the prime over, and we simply accepted this? Shrugging again, I tried my best to look contrite. Ambassador, you have to understand, up to that point, humanity legitimately thought we were alone in the galaxy. The revelation that so many intelligent species already existed across the stars, well, it gave us quite a galactic culture shock, I can assure you. I went on to outline how first contact with the greater galactic community had forced humans to rapidly recalibrate our technology sharing and diplomatic approach. A metaphorical olive branch in one hand, even as the other solidified our territorial claims and economic leverage. We had carved out such a preposterously large foothold before making contact. The only sane path forward involved extensive negotiations and trade incentives. The United Human Republic was willing to play by the established rules from that point onward, as long as our pre-existing sovereign territories and wealth were respected. Kalaxar sat in silence for several long moments, his eyes swiveling across the elaborate star maps as his mind digested the enormity of what I'd revealed. I could appreciate the cognitive dissonance it must all represent for a veteran negotiator accustomed to civilizations following intergalactic protocols. Let me summarize my understanding, he finally said. I braced myself for the critique I knew was coming. By ill-fated happenstance, your species managed to avoid crossing paths with any other intelligent spacefaring civilization for nearly 3 centuries after first departing your homeworld. I nodded, trying to avoid appearing smug. During that time frame, you established a technological and economic juggernaut unhindered by any oversight from bodies charged with, well, preventing the very circumstances you created. This time I simply shrugged. There was no use denying the embarrassing truth. Humans had stumbled upward through astronomical dumb luck and our uncanny drive as a species. The ambassador let out a bemused chitter. And when the rest of the galactic community became aware of your widespread presence, you had already cemented such an entrenched economic and territorial foothold that any objections proved futile. I fought to keep my expression neutral, despite the implicit dig at humanity's underhanded dominance. The plain facts were difficult to argue, no matter how diplomatically one phrased them. Despite this rather unorthodox state of affairs, he continued, mandibles clicking, the Republic managed to negotiate its position into general acceptance by leveraging threats of restricting access to vital resources and technologies. I gave a deferential nod, opting to remain silent. The negotiation records spoke for themselves. After a long pause, Klaxar deflated slightly. And here we find ourselves, eons later, my consortium seeking yet another trade agreement from the dominant Human Republic in order to maintain stability and economic growth. There was resignation in his tone, and the faintest undercurrent of resentment that humans had become such an unassailable power purely by accident of timing and location. I spread my hands in a placating gesture. I realize it's unorthodox, unthinkable even by any civilized measure, but I assure you, the United Human Republic has only civilized interests at heart. It sounded trite to my own ears, but it was a party line I was obligated to recite. We are committed to developing new technologies and sustainable interstellar policies for the mutual benefit of the galactic community. I winced inwardly at how blatantly self-serving that sounded. All we require in exchange is to maintain our existing sovereign territories and trade partnerships. There was a prolonged silence as Ambassador Klaxar stared at me, mandibles working slowly as he no doubt weighed the merits of my arguments against the less than savory realities they only thinly veiled. After several tense minutes, He finally gave a small nod. Very well, Diplomat Genric. I look forward to the draft proposal in the agreed-upon time window. I recognized the dismissive tone and rose to gather my materials. Another negotiation concluded, another tenuous trade agreement waiting to be hashed out in excruciating bureaucratic detail. As I made my way toward the conference chamber's ornate exit, I caught the ambassador's eyes, tracking me with what looked like a mixture of wariness and resignation. I didn't have to be a multi-species psychologist to intuit the thoughts tumbling around in Clarksar's intellect. We were the unintended barbarians who had simply wandered blindly onto the galactic stage and then dug in our heels when the natives demanded open borders. Now, instead of some cautionary tale for overambitious protostates, we were the dominant power, bloated, uncultured, and dictating terms to the angst-filled civilizations we'd inadvertently supplanted. And they all knew there wasn't a damn thing they could do about it except play along. Because humans hadn't gotten the memo that galactic civilizations had already mapped out nearly every available hyperlane and resource-rich star system long before we even coalesced our fledgling interstellar drives. We were the species that didn't get the memo, and then completely disrupted life as everyone else knew it. As I exited the lush diplomatic compound into the bustling human spaceport metropolis beyond, I felt a twinge of melancholy pride. For all the criticism about naked expansionism, the simple truth remained. We were here to stay. And damn if we weren't going to keep right on not getting those memos.